Hello, and welcome to Design Review, the podcast for engineering your life. I'm Robert Haynes, founder of Engineering Your Life, and today my guest is repeat guest, Catlin O'Shaughnessy Coffin. Cat, welcome back to Design Review.
Thank you. I can tell how much you like doing this because you've got a big smile on your face. You're like
It,
gleeful over there.
it is definitely one of my favorite things to do, and I enjoy having you here. I'll give some of your bio, just a snippet of it. So Kat is the founder of Captivating Consulting, and I realize I never asked where the name came from, so we may come back to that.
Right.
Also, a writer, podcaster, and speaker, and I can attest to the writing part because I've read some of your recent work that has just been really, really powerful. Kat is a brand strategist who works with leaders, teams, and companies to amplify their voices and elevate their impact. Kat advises executives at leading firms across a wide variety of industries and sectors. And I met Kat on LinkedIn as a person posting about life. And I will say that from the beginning and continuing even more so now, what you've posted and what you're sharing about life and work and clients and about your therapist conversations and your kids and dating, it's all really, really touched me. Like I feel my own life through what you're sharing. And so I'm really glad to have you back on Design Review. So welcome.
Thank you. And I remember the last time I was here, we went down a couple of literary rabbit holes, but you were just reminding me. I just picked up a book of Emerson essays the other day to gift to a friend. And the classic Emerson quote about the unexamined life is not worth living. And I feel like there's so much about taking time to observe what we're going through, but also to share it. And I know not everybody is wired that way, but I think it's something that you and I definitely both share. It's listening to you rattle off that list of stuff that I write about. I forgot about some of that stuff. I do write a lot about my therapist. And I will text her and say, hey, just so you know, I'm giving you credit for all of your wisdom. She's like, you don't have to do that. But that's kind of the fun, right? Otherwise, what are we doing here?
Well, I'm glad that it's fun. It wouldn't be fun for everybody. I talk about my posts, which now I'm like over 400 posts, over 200 on my blog. It's just ridiculous. I talk about that as like I'm journaling in public,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a kindred spirit. There's a few of us out there, but it's still pretty rare for people to be that vulnerable. I gravitate towards people that are that intimate and authentic. I feel safer around people that are that open.
Well, I think it is rare. I would say it's distasteful to some people. And part of the challenge or the reality is that we're choosing to do this in a space that is sort of the extreme of the corporate culture, which is about hiding behind perfection or conveying strength and wisdom. I have some clients who work in, and I do a lot of work in the healthcare space. I work with a woman who's I retired from a big hospital system. She's a physician who's now a coach. And we've talked a lot about the hospitals in particular and healthcare being a space as well, where it's kind of like the extreme version of you're coached up in that culture and in that industry and in that profession to always have the answers and to never say, I don't know. And so you're really you're cultivating this work environment and this corporate culture that bleeds into so many different parts of our lives where we're teaching people that you have to be serious all the time in order to be taken seriously. And then in order to be successful, you have to be infallible. And we're prizing this idea that I think is sometimes a little bit dissonant and jarring of always conveying that you have the answers and never allowing yourself to be human and open about what you're dealing with at home. And then we're saying, be authentic, be you, bring yourself to work-life balance. And I think we're talking out of both sides of our mouths. So those of us who choose to really go all in and be ourselves and be pretty open, on the one hand, we have to acknowledge our privilege here. You and I don't have bosses.
Yeah.
I once wrote a post saying that I realize my content sometimes can be labeled or can be seen as unhinged. And sometimes people use that term self-deprecatingly, but a guy I used to work with reached out and he said, it's not unhinged. It reads to me as liberated.
That's a good word. Well, and you realize the language people are going to use is going to depend on where they are on their own journey.
It's about them. Yeah.
And I will say that as you're describing this culture, I'm just like cringing inside. And for two reasons, but the main reason is working in an environment where that's the culture is oppressive and toxic and painful. It is awful to work in an environment where your coworkers and especially your leadership have to continually give off this air of being perfect. It's and I mean, this is coming from somebody who spent most of his life trying to look good because I was afraid of how I would be seen. It's only in the process of bottoming out and going through recovery that I've this view, I earned this view. Have you always had that view?
Oh boy, that's a good question. Gosh, I don't know. I think I've always been unapologetically authentic. I think that's always been my leadership style. But I will say, as you know, I've been on a journey. I've been writing a lot for years. I left my job 6.5 years ago. And on that path, I've really been enjoying being unrestricted in what I say. I came from a company where we were kind of discouraged from having our own voices,
I could
which
see
I think
that.
a lot of us have. But it wasn't until a year and a half ago that I separated from my husband and then became divorced last September. That there's something kind of like having to be that person walking into rooms. I was just in one last night and there's a woman I haven't seen in quite a while. And I was like, oh, hey, just so you know, since I last saw you, I got divorced. And you're kind of ripping off the Band-Aid because it's out in the open. I live in a tiny little New England town. My ex and I are good friends. We get along well. Right after we split, we had to go through fifth grade graduation for our oldest. And for anyone who's gone through any graduation, including fifth grade, it's like a really intense process where you spend a lot of time in community with a lot of people and everyone's observing, and people were like watching where we were sitting and watching if we were talking. And when I remember we showed up at a spring chorus like music concert last spring, and I had texted him because I didn't have any of our tools and I had moved out and I needed a screwdriver. And we sat in the very front row of the concert, and he walks in and he's like, says hi, and my daughter sits between us and he hands me a screwdriver. And I thought, I wonder what everyone's thinking right now because they're all watching us. They're like, what's going on there? And like, I just put it in my purse, and then I brought it back to him at like a community meeting the next week. And at some point, you're just like on a stage and you have no choice to try and pretend like you have it all together. And it's far more interesting and fun to just be open because like we all know how common divorce is. We're not the only people going through this. You can suffer in silence or try to be protective or try to act like you have it all together, or you can be open and let people feel comfortable. And you also do a lot of work. I think when you're going through something hard that's visible and obvious, a lot of our grief, I think for better or worse, we can keep quite hidden. But when people know, when you're changing homes, when your kids no longer, are going to the same play dates or whatever, there's something a little liberating about the fact that it is really public. So but you do spend a lot of emotional energy having to make other people feel okay about it.
Well, you can. It's
Yeah.
it's been an interesting journey. I mean, we went through it in different ways. Actually, it turns out that's especially when I heard your really, really open, vulnerable story about your parents, even though mine had different stories, there was so much overlap in experience and in feelings. That I got from that like literally, I told you before we started recording that it like wrecked me. Like I was an emotional mess for a while. Not because there was something pain. I mean, I understood, but because it brought some stuff up for me that I hadn't remembered from my past. And I've done a really good job of doing the archaeology on my past. But yeah, my honesty came from like, saying things about, what I've gone through. And as I've discovered that I was like basically addicted to my ex-wife, which is not a fun, process to go through, especially the withdrawal process when you start having your feelings come back again. That was really painful. And I had just been promoted to a technology development position, and it was a tough time for me. I'm amazed I got through it. But part of how I got through it is I went to meetings up to every day of the week where I was like openly sharing with other people who'd got it, who'd been there. And I'll tell you, that was so healing for me to take the stuff that had been buried and was like poison for me and just like get it out into the open with other people who could receive it. And
Yeah.
now tell people all the time. It's often, I'm very open about my past. I talk about the fact that my stepfather was a pedophile, and people always cringe. And meanwhile, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I've done the work. That's no longer running my life, that I went through that experience. And so, and you've been really open about, sexual assault, and that's hard to read, but I got to believe that being able to be open about it has been healing.
I mean, if we're not being open about stuff, and when I say open, I know that looks different for everybody. It doesn't have to be on a public stage like you and I have both chosen to do, but being open, you're either shoving stuff down and spending a lot of energy to keep it down, or you're letting stuff out and setting it free. And I actually just got a very long email from a stranger 2 days ago in Amsterdam. And she somehow found me not through LinkedIn, I think through my Medium writings and my pod. And then she found my podcast about my dead parents. And she just was like, "You're the first person I've come across who said out loud that it's okay to kind of wish your parents would die. And then we can love them at the same time that we're feeling that." And the truth is, I now know, because people tell me all the time, that it's a very common thing. And there's a universality to this. To your point, the facts don't have to be the same. You and I are not the same age. We don't live in the same place. Um, for there to be some kind of universal truths or shared experiences, maybe not to everybody, but between our stories, the facts don't have to line up for us to be able to share human experiences and sometimes emotions that are hard to articulate. And I find people all the time saying to me, I took myself out to dinner 2 nights ago. My girls are away at summer camps. I have nothing going on right now except work. And I sat up at the bar at this cute little place here in my Vermont town. And I can't even tell you how it happened, but within 2 minutes, I was talking to these two women. They're in their 60s. They were visiting from Indiana. And maybe within 5 minutes, we were like crying about our dead parents. And I was telling my two best girlfriends about this, who were always texting. And I was like, I think I left that night with their phone numbers. And the next morning I was like, did I just pick up two middle-aged women from Indiana? Like, I'm single now. It's a little different. And we exchanged a few texts. I sent them some of my writings, but we were talking about, at one point I said, I wrote an essay called "It's Okay to Wish for Death." And it was about my parents and their long declines. And this one woman was like, "Say no more. I know exactly what you mean." And the human bonding, the sort of almost shortcut to the bonding, is very healing as well. So I know not everyone has the means or the skill or the ability or the opportunity to feel free to share their stuff. But I hope that even if you can't say it, that you're doing some writing to let it, you got to at least acknowledge it, right? So otherwise you're pushing it down and it's going to come out when you don't want it to.
And I've had to learn how to make it right size, because, when I first started sharing, I would just like, as my sponsor would say, like throw up on their shoes. Basically, my entire story would come out. I will say that dating proved to be interesting, because I don't have secrets anymore. I have like no secrets anymore. So basically, I will tell somebody about my past, my history, where I'm at, what I'm dealing with, and I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
And it does weed people out pretty quick. If somebody's going to cut and run, fine. To some extent, it almost became a dare.
A dare. I was going to say maybe a litmus test, but I do think there's a little bit. I remember one guy I dated a couple of months ago, and he said on maybe our first or second date, but he was like, "I realized that I am who I am. Like, there's no point in me trying to like pretend I'm somebody else, because I'm probably not going to change. I mean, we're all growing, I hope."
Sure.
Frankly, another guy I went out with a couple of weeks ago said something over dinner. We were talking about New England culture. I'm not a New Englander, so I can make broad generalizations about it. And he was talking about his parents and his sister, and he was saying, in my family growing up, we were such like a classic traditional New England waspy family where no one has feelings. And he said, honestly, it wasn't until I got divorced last year that I discovered that I do have feelings. And it was so earnest and endearing the way he said it, because it was like such a real, sometimes you have to go through this horrible thing, as you and I both know, maybe not even a horrible thing, but this massive upheaval, to sort of discover and get back in touch with the stuff that you've been working real hard to hide from yourself. It's one thing to hide it from other people, but we're doing a lot of work to hide our real feelings from ourselves.
Well, yeah, ultimately we have to deceive ourselves first. Otherwise it makes it really, weird. I mean, it's weird all the way. But getting it out, which is a process. I mean, it's been 7.5 years for me, and I will never be done. But who I am now is much more true to myself than who I had made up to look like.
And doesn't it feel better? Don't you feel like you're a little bit more in harmony?
Oh, a lot more in harmony. Not even just,
Yeah.
not a little.
Yeah.
I can feel actual peace and comfort with myself. I'm in my own. I don't get lonely.
Yeah. Wow. That's a statement. Just pause on that. That's a big
Yeah,
statement. Yeah.
there is no comparison to where I am at now and where I used to be. You know, I haven't dated in 2 years. I mean, at some point I will again, but I'm kind of busy right now.
Yeah, you're quite busy. Yeah.
But you know, I will. I'm not even opposed to getting married again. The first 3 were kind of a little.
3?
You're learning. Yes,
I've been married.
I've been married and divorced 3 times.
3 times? Oh my gosh.
Childhood sweetheart.
I don't think I need another marriage.
And they were of some length, right? 11-year relationship, 14-year relationship, 10-year relationship. Yeah, it's you know, one of the things is like, you know, I wasn't a healed person, so I wasn't a great partner.
Yeah.
The marriages looked good on the outside, but there was a lot of like I was conflict avoidant.
Always a great thing.
You know, I grew up where conflict was dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I learned to manage other people's feelings. I learned how to be a people pleaser. I learned how to be a perfectionist. I learned a lot of coping mechanisms that served me in various. I think one of the reasons I was a good engineer is because of some skills I learned as coping mechanisms as a child.
Well, I want to pause on that for a sec because I think that's interesting. And I know you said you just listened to my podcast, which is now 3 years old, but the 6th episode, I brought my therapist on, which made her deeply uncomfortable. Talk about people in professions where they don't feel comfortable, you know, boasting or being in public or whatever. And I was talking to her about exactly this, just even about the process that I went through and what it felt like, and why there's something really interesting you just hit on that she and I examined a little bit together. A lot of the strengths and skills and tools that we develop in traumatic experiences in childhood serve us well in the corporate world. And it creates a kind of complicated relationship because as you heal, I don't think you're going to lose those skill sets, but that therapist, I've shared this on LinkedIn a few times because I think it's really important and I want more people to hear it. She was the first person who said to me, compartmentalization is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a sign of great emotional intelligence. And it is you protecting yourself so that you can do what you need to get done. The challenge, of course, is if you never decompartmentalize, or she wouldn't use that term, she would say integrate, right? And allow that wall to kind of come down. But I remember like walking on stage at an all agency meeting, which in the marketing agency world is like the Hunger Games, you know, where you go once a year and you kind of like present to your competitors and vie for more shares of the pie or whatever. And right before I walked on the stage to give a pretty high stakes, multi-million-dollar, you know, presentation, my dad's ex-girlfriend called me and she's like, I just want to let you know that your dad is actively dying. And I don't know that anyone's really said that to you. She said he was in the end stage of alcoholism and I didn't really know what that meant. And I was like, okay, thank you, Ronnie. Like, I really appreciate you calling me. And I hung up and I just walked out there and I did the presentation. Zipped it right up. So like these things serve us. You know, you being an engineer, that doesn't surprise me at all. But then what do we do with that?
Well, that's
it's not all bad or good, right?
We could spend the rest of our time on this, and I don't want to short.
Are you going to redirect me?
It's no. This is great, I love talking with people that have done enough work to be aware to have this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, I agree with your therapist to a point.
Sure, everything.
There is a point where being able to compartmentalize does serve you, but over time, there are higher levels of being available that involve a more deep, it's hard work though. Not everybody's up to it at the moment, and it does become the work of your life. But what I've learned, especially with my program, I have an addiction to process where the answer is not abstinence. You know, you could be addicted to alcohol or cocaine or whatever, and not doing it is a really good step. You know, if your addiction is people or food, or if you have money addiction problems? The answer is moderation and
Moderation.
regulation. That's the answer. That's a much harder thing to do than to say, I'm not touching a drop of alcohol again.
Oh, that's so
Now,
true.
granted, that's not the answer either, because you have to do
Yeah.
emotional regulation no matter what.
Yeah.
Because most of the time people end up addicted to something is because they have tremendous pain that won't go away, and they do whatever they got to do to take care of it. I've been a workaholic, like a literal one. I've used work to medicate feelings.
I think a lot of people have done that.
Yeah, I've used YouTube
Yeah.
videos. I've used food. I just, my biggest problem was like romance and relationships. That was what like did me in and damaged my life. But meanwhile, the answer to that is to find the uncomfortable gray middle area of uncertainty. But that is a lot of delicate work and introspection and unearthing and bringing the feelings out and learning how to live with them.
Yeah.
So I would see compartmentalization as a survival tool that is like an intermediate coping mechanism, but it's still a coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism, and I think coping mechanisms have their place in our lives, right?
Yeah.
As long as we are aware of them and we know what to do with them and when to use them. But I do think we tend to your point, we're not comfortable in the gray area often. And we tend to want to make everything black and white. And so we take certain phrases and we throw them out there as like uniformly bad or uniformly good.
Yeah.
And the real, one thing that I've been working on with my girls who are 10 and 12 now, almost 10 and 12, which is such an interesting age from a developmental perspective and mentally, like neuroplasticity. And I remember last year, my therapist said something to me about, she said, I think it's really great that you and your ex are very committed to giving your girls space to have their feelings. You're not robbing. He and I are very aligned on that. And I would call him when they were having a hard day and I'm like, this is hard. And at the same time, don't watch that you don't indulge them into self-pity, because the truth is they have a really good life and life is full of hard things. And they are capable of holding both of those truths, that their hearts are broken, the thing that they feared most did happen, and also they have a really good life. And I started, and it's as often with our children, we underestimate them a lot of times and we forget to like lift up that bar and give them room to rise to it. And of course they rose to it, and it's taken some time. And I think they heard me. Oftentimes I'll say things to them that is jarring, and I'm extremely open with them, more so than I ever have been, partly because of their age, but partly because of this stage of life that we're in together. And I'll see them ruminate. I think of it a little bit like when your computer is buffering, when you're in a like no cell zone or whatever. And it's just that little, and I see them thinking and kind of tucking away, and maybe weeks later it'll come back. And you see them marinating, and I see them and I hear them say now all the time, like, wow, I'm really glad that you and dad get along. We're really lucky that we have 2 homes, and there's people who don't have any homes, and we live in this beautiful place and we get to do all these things. And so I do think even our children are able to live in that space where the murky, the unsatisfying, muddy middle is frankly most often. But like that doesn't make for great LinkedIn content.
It doesn't, but when you do share about it, I'm just like cheering for you, because that's not easy. But that's what produces well-rounded, resilient humans.
Well, it's real, right? That's what's real.
It's interesting that it just seems so like obvious to you, because most people aren't doing that. We're either like making children's lives hard just because we're projecting our own crap onto them and expecting them to handle it, and basically they become the adults. Oh, and you've had experience with that. So you understand what it's like to be on that side of the foot, or to parent your parent. I've done it too. There's a lot about your story that I've lived too. So, and we can also shelter them. Mm-hmm. But the what I wish I had learned, if I had one thing I had wished I had learned as a child, it would be to fail well. Because I was good enough at what I did that I could manage to not fail by brute force through my life, because I was so terrified of ever having anything go wrong, ever having somebody not like me, ever having something fail, that basically I would go to the point where I would like misdirect or even lie to keep somebody from finding out there was something that might have hurt their feelings about what I had done,
Yeah.
which doesn't make for a great spouse, I'll tell you.
But that really resonates with me because I do think, I just had a client over here yesterday. I was doing 2 hour leader interview with him, and he talked a lot about perfection in his childhood and his fear of failure. And we were talking a little bit about that nature versus nurture, because he said, I don't see any source of it. Like my parents didn't put that on me. They were, if I failed a test and I told them, they would say, did you try your best? And I might say, no. And they're like, well, you got to try, we want you to try your best, but we know that you're not always going to get perfect grades or whatever. And so we were talking a little bit about like, where did that come from? Because now in his late 40s, in a career transition, he's grappling with that again. It's coming back up, and this fear of failure. And I do think, my oldest got a concussion this year, and I've never dealt with a concussion. She's a ski racer. And it was really hard to watch her go through that. And she was home for 3 weeks. I remember I wrote something on LinkedIn about it because she was driving me up the wall when I was like, Amelia,
I remember reading that.
It's on camera. You cannot bother me. And she's like, okay, mom. And literally like 2 minutes later, she's like stomping her feet, flushing the toilet, talking to the dog, and then looks at me like, what? And then at some point, like edges into the screen and says hi. And people are so gracious now, but it was like, so she was home for 3 weeks. And, you have an ADHD kid who you have to say no, complete brain rest, like the opposite of what she needed. She invented a religion during that time.
Oh, that's when that came from. Okay.
What was really profound was watching her come back. And she's in 6th grade, and it was a big year for her academically, where she's having tests every day and she's having grades for the first time. And we're expecting so much more from them, and a kid who doesn't naturally have a lot of great executive functioning skills. And so she was stressed all the time. And these are athletes who ski 5 days a week and do running and whatever. And so I had to watch her like learn how she went to school early every day for several weeks. She was out for 3 weeks just to get that window where the teachers are in the classroom and just learn how to self-advocate. And I kept saying, like, 6th grade is a training year where you're learning how to learn for you. And then I was so terrified for her to get back out and ski. And she went to her first ski practice after, I think, 6 weeks after the accident. And my ex went with her, and he was like, don't worry, I'm going to be with her. I'm going to ski with her. We're going to like be at training, but I'll be there. And they called me. I think I must have been traveling for work. And he's like, we have to tell you something. And then Amelia gets on the phone and she's like, Mom, I have a bloody nose. And I fell on my face. And I was like, Amelia, you can't hit your head. That's the whole point. She goes, I didn't hit my head. I hit my nose. But watching her get back up again, and I wouldn't call it concussion of failure, but watching them be set back and come back, or allowing them to walk into, both of my girls auditioned for a play this spring, and I was like cringing because I didn't know. And one of them got a great role and one of them didn't. And not being able to protect them, but learning that our role is to just encourage them and to not make them doubt themselves. I'm always trying to minimize sometimes their ambition because I'm nervous for them, and they've called me out. I'll be like, well, not everyone's going to get a role. There's more actors than roles. And theater is a lot of rejection, and it's sometimes subjective. And they're like, Mom, when you do that, you make us feel like you don't support us. And I've learned that there's no place for that. The whole world is going to tell them to doubt themselves. I am supposed to be the safe person who's very open, who's rising the bar and giving them room to think deeply about complicated things, to challenge themselves.
Yeah.
But I should not be the one saying, maybe you should dream a little smaller. How dare I?
Well, one might ask, so why are you doing that?
It's certainly from my childhood, right?
Yeah,
You can bet I brought this one to therapy. I'm like so afraid. It's like when I found out she was ADHD, and when I watched, she identifies as like a weirdo and kind of an outcast. And she's very proud to be that, because frankly, the alternative is not that appealing either. And when she was younger, I had this desire to mold her to make her a little bit easier for society.
Yeah.
Like you talk to her, and within 2 minutes, she's just really like upside down talking to you. Like her body is always moving, and she's so off the wall. And then I had a tutor that we worked with for a few years. And I remember she called me one day and she said, our job is not to make Amelia easier to teach. Our job is to take everything we have to bend the entire system to meet her where she's at. And I was like, Shauna, I will pay you a lot of money to say that to me frequently, because I came from a place where my job is to be small and not a problem.
Yeah.
And so learning how to check my own biases, or like Amelia got up and sang all of Alexander Hamilton at the talent show. I think this may have been around when we talked last year, actually, because maybe it was around then. And I like didn't want to go because she's this little tiny sixth grader. She's a tiny peanut. And there's like seniors who are going to USC next year who are like opera singers. And Amelia gets up there and sings this song. And she just guilelessly puts herself out there. And of course, it's not about me. I can't ask her not to put herself out there. I need to be there rooting on louder than anybody else in that room. And it was so cute because the high school seniors loved it and they were all cheering her on. And she got like the fast like rap part really good. And it was a very humbling moment for me to kind of sit back and say, no one else in this room is having a hard time supporting her up there. This is a me problem.
Yeah. I would say that raising her, first of all, I think you're doing an amazing job. I love hearing the stories and about your honesty about what's challenging you, but especially given your upbringing, I imagine it's really, really challenging not to just keep projecting your stuff onto her, and then trying to defend her from what would have hurt you.
Right, and it's like we think we're warriors, right? We're trying to relive our own childhood through them by protecting them from what would have hurt us.
It's unavoidable. We but that then becomes part of your growth, and I love that you're facing it, because some people would just get really defensive and think they're right.
Well, and don't you think so much of everything we've talked about here, and even the living out loud about these things, is about breaking those cycles? You know, one of my favorite essays I wrote is the one called "The Grief That We Inherit," and it goes back to my grandmother, who I never knew, who was very abusive, my mom.
Yeah.
And then me, and thinking about my girls, and how this is stuff, you know, that's passed on. One reason that podcast was so important to me was because it was after my mom passed in 2022. I was in Seattle with my sister, and we were looking at this photo album of our parents. And it was from right after they got married. They took a honeymoon, like this beautiful, I talk about it a little bit in the podcast, and they're in like their yellow hippie van with their dogs camping across the country and back in Canada. And I was like, isn't it interesting that this is the version of mom and dad that we've internalized, because they talked about it so much to us, but we never knew that version of them.
Yeah.
And as we talked about it, we realized that like this sequence of events, like when my dad got shot in the line of duty, happened a year before I was born. And the grief that my mother had for 14 years after that, before she finally left him, even though he was very ill.
Yeah.
And this sort of discovery where I looked at my sister, and I remember this moment, I was like, oh, wow, they were broken before I even was born. And the context for my arrival on this earth was I arrived into this family that was very sad. And that was like, you know, they talk about even what happens in the birthing room as like being so important for how we start our lives. The Scientologists, you know, don't allow, what are they, like no noise or whatever, because they like want it to be a peaceful arrival. And the reality is none of us get a peaceful arrival. Life is chaotic.
No.
And so we start out there. And to me, it's so important to recognize that even when I do leader branding, and I'm in the process of doing a strategic pivot with my business, because I think the world's gotten a lot more sophisticated about personal branding and leadership branding. And I think it's time for me to update the way that I talk about it. But what I'm really doing is kind of like a midlife, mid-career kind of recovery.
Yeah.
Where I help people go back and we walk through everything that they've done professionally and in their lives. And what I'm trying to do is we start off by, I always say at the beginning of the first interview, what happened before you were born? Because there's something about acknowledging the circumstances we can't control that we were born into.
Oh, yeah.
And as you start to tell your whole story and everything you've done, all the way by the end, you're telling me about what you did last week and what you learned about it and your wisdom that you have in business. Those themes and wins and trends are kind of like there, and you can see them, and suddenly we give ourselves a little more grace.
And not everybody takes the time to distill it. You know, I admire that you are. It's one of the reasons that I'm following, is because I think people that haven't done that level of work end up having missed opportunities for clarity and solidity, because I don't think we don't get through this life without some kind of trauma.
Right.
You know, there wasn't blood on the walls in my house, but my dad's favorite punishment was to ignore you, you know, basically turn his back on you.
I'm so sorry.
And he did that my entire life. Like my entire life. his favorite form of dealing with his own shame was to ignore you. I was on his little league team, miss a ball in the outfield. He didn't talk to me the rest of the game. That was one of like the
That
favorite.
is such a weapon.
Yeah. But here's the deal though. I got to talk with him about this. I spent the last 5 years of his life, and even somewhat more successfully than with my mom, actually talking to them about what their lives were like. And one of the most profound things my dad told me towards the end of his life was, son, we both had really crappy fathers.
Oh, wow.
I said that when we had the services for him, when we scattered his ashes in the Sonoran Desert Museum outside of Tucson. But yeah, I ended up being able to interview my parents about their lives.
That's amazing.
And their parents' lives.
Yeah.
Because I dug in. I rolled up my sleeves and I was like doing the work. It's been hard work. I spent a year in trauma therapy. But it has really put me much more at peace with a real life and with real disappointment and with real challenge. And I can see why my dad, like that's part of why your story was so resonant, is because you were understanding what happened and why your dad was the way he was, and having some completion and forgiveness and compassion for this person, and also realizing that it wasn't all about the injury. It wasn't all about being shot.
Well, that was what was interesting about that part of that was, yes, empathy and compassion through understanding, which is I've finally come to understand in the last year or two. And a lot of this is learning more about myself through dating, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I've come to understand that what I do, and I think you probably do too, is I don't just want to know what happened, but I want to understand why. And I don't want to just know somebody's like biography. I want to know why they did the things that they did or didn't do. And it's like the seeking to understand. And that's always been the way that I am. And I think it's just a trait. And it's maybe a little bit about, we were talking about brain computers this morning on LinkedIn. Maybe that's my brain computer, like seeks to understand, and I want context. But I think I spent so long being compassionate to my dad that I internalized some of the shame that was his to carry. So here's another one where it can be an overdrawn, what do they call, like an overdrawn strength or whatever, where being compassionate to him didn't necessarily serve me. And so actually the most profound part to me, there were little things that were profound and then big things. The most profound was in this interview I had with my cousin Terry, who was kind of like, yeah, do I think that shooting exacerbated his drinking? Sure, of course. Do I think there's a chance he would have been a shitty dad anyway? Yeah, possibly. He was already an alcoholic.
That was pretty profound. It sounded like that was a big step for you.
It lifted something for me. And it allowed me to realize that I had been misplacing and then I had this recording of him telling his own story for an AA testimonial. And that was really profound because he blamed himself. And yet I was blaming myself. Isn't that crazy? And then when I finally let go of that, I rediscovered other things in that space, because we only have so much space. So if you're hanging on so tightly to somebody else's guilt or shame, or to working so hard to uphold a hero's narrative for your father who abandoned you, there's something else that could be in that space. And once I let go of that, I reconnected with my mother.
Yeah. And
the memory of my mother. And that was even more profound. Yeah. Because I had been holding a lot of rage and angst towards her. And in the last couple of years, I have felt much more connected to her. So I feel like I've honored both of them, but it was lopsided.
And that's a common thing. I participated in a recovery group called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And one of the things that happens in that situation where you have a parent that's an alcoholic is that the kids become hyper responsible.
We feel like we have to protect them.
Yeah. And and while, the dysfunction in my family was different, I qualified for that program. And it's one of these things that program is for adult children. People resort to childish coping mechanisms to deal with adult situations, but usually adult children were child adults. And so when you talked about being an adult when you were young, I was an adult when I was 7. And different circumstances, but very similar experiences. And so
yeah.
it becomes like yes, we have coping mechanisms and true liberation. I love the word, by the way, that you brought up earlier. True liberation comes from right sizing that.
Yeah.
From taking the gifts that came from it. Yeah, I happen to have a real good attention to detail. And I happen to have the ability to really think thoroughly through what might go wrong. That serves me well as an engineer. It does not serve me well as a human. When it runs me. And so my job is to, what they say in program a lot is take what serves and leave the rest. So basically there are parts of what I've learned. In fact, even ACA calls them defenses of character versus AA calls them defects of character. That's basically things that you learned how to do to survive your childhood that served you for a while, like you're alive, but no longer serve you as an adult. And so basically you take the part that's useful. Like I can pay attention. I can make a mean spreadsheet, I'll tell you.
Very useful.
Yeah, well, it can be. It also can run my life. And so part of my work, and in fact, the work I do with my clients is to one of my favorite topics is emotional regulation. In fact, my first book is The Engineer's Guide to Emotional Regulation. I'm writing that now.
Are your clients mostly in engineering?
Well, at first my target was engineers. But right now my clients, as redefined it, my clients are helpers. And they tend to be systems thinking, analytical people. Because that's my background, which may be engineers, yes, and others. But my particular target is helpers that need help to follow their own advice.
Okay.
And that means you logically know what to do, but somehow aren't doing it. And when that happens, that means there's something buried. There's something in the unconscious that's not coming out. And I will say that the Jungian tools have been extremely helpful for unearthing those particular things. But yeah, engineers, I do a lot of work with engineers. I've done a lot of mentoring and coaching and stuff with that, but it's not exclusively that population.
Aren't we lucky that we get to design our business to do this stuff that's so personally meaningful?
So. Oh yeah. I'm lucky that I don't technically have to work. I could pay the mortgage, without working if I needed to. My needs are small enough. That's part of how I decided to retire. But I'm doing what I'm doing because it fulfills me. It feels so good to have a conversation with somebody that's stuck and help them become lighter and discover who they really are and what's really true about them and what they can do. And then just see their shoulders drop. I love doing that. I adore doing that. I'll have a session with a client. I'll feel lighter afterwards. I'll feel, more enthusiastic about whatever I'm doing.
I'm going to give you another Emerson quote.
Oh yeah.
In Success, he says, to know that even when life has breathed easier because you have lived.
Oh yeah.
You have succeeded. And I put it in a lot of my presentations because I like to talk about purpose, and purpose is a tricky one. And I think it's overdone, and I think it's poorly done, and I think it's sometimes weaponized in the corporate world. But I do think staying connected to and having a common, open, constant curiosity with ourselves of what matters most in life and what's going to be meaningful, and knowing that it's going to shift. There's no wrong answer. So I often will lay out a Nelson Mandela quote. There is no passion to be had in living a life less than the one we were capable of living. And I think of that as like big capital P. And then I think of lowercase p as the Emerson quote, which is that it could even be about walking away from a meeting where you gave somebody this gift that they feel a little bit lighter.
Absolutely. In fact, my current website says a lot about purpose, and I care a lot about it. I've done a lot of work to find mine. And that is certainly something I feel very passionate about. But isn't it quite the opportunity that we get to live into what we're doing by choice? One of the reasons I like following you is I'm you're farther along in that process than me, because I've only been retired 2 years and my business has only existed for 1.5. But I love watching what you're doing and how authentically you're doing. Like, this is me. This is what I do. And it took me a while in life to learn that that was actually a net plus. When you do that, you end up attracting the people that are supposed to be around you.
You know, anecdotally, I do. It's embarrassing how much I talk about LinkedIn, but I'm just going to talk about it. Anecdotally, I hear most often about the posts that I write about the way I just do a rundown. I think you're referring to this every few months because I don't write about work much, but I'm like, oh, I should. That's really why I'm here. It's driving my business. I am not retired. I need to make money. I am a single mother.
Yeah.
Um, but when I'll write like, here's 3 things I've been hired to do lately. And people like that because I think it gives them, it's so much more interesting than just saying, I'm a brand strategist and a personal brand consultant and coach, blah, 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 blah. I help people,
Yeah.
and people like to understand that, like, I got hired from someone who's exiting the C suite to design what they're going to do next or to pressure test a business model or a value prop, or I get brought in to help teams to make their leaders more effective communicators. And um, yeah, it's so fun, the problems that we get to grapple with. And I'm always surprised that that's the thing that people will mention because they don't like perform ostensibly well. Um, but
Oh,
I was at a conference here in Vermont in May, and I think I had maybe 5 or 6 people who I've never met be like, "Oh yeah, I know you from LinkedIn," and I was like, "How do I feel about that?" Now you know my parents are dead. You know about my daughter. Like, but
yeah.
I'm putting it all out there. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's I also realize that we're running on the time side, but I'm enjoying the conversation so long as we were okay for you to continue.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to steer it into the lessons learned from dating because it has had me curious because you've had people you've talked about and you have a following that's like cheering for some of them.
I know. I got a couple DMs today about one of them. I was like, oh my gosh.
um, it'd be surprising to me that these people aren't like looking you up on LinkedIn. But
Some of them are.
I'm not in that pool right now. I will say that the last time I dated somebody, they had researched me.
Oh yeah. Well, so here's the way it is today. And I'm speaking from a very tiny little corner of the world and a very tiny part of that market in Stowe, Vermont, which is a very weird little place. So let's in a weird little state. So I am not by any means talking about it as like anywhere else. What I have found lately is pretty standard is if you're meeting somebody on a dating app and you go back and forth a little bit, and then you decide to meet up because you're getting good vibes or whatever, and then you make a specific plan, and then at that point you exchange phone numbers, and that's when you go off the app. And usually when I exchange phone numbers is when I ask for somebody's last name so that I can know who I'm giving my phone number to. And the expectation is that, of course, you're Googling each other because you need to make sure this person is not a serial killer to the extent they are able. I was thinking the other day about the number of times I've made the joke on dates, like, oh, don't kill me. And I'm like, I gotta stop saying that. But it'll be like I can't even tell you how many of the guys I meet know like family members through my in-laws because I live in Vermont. It's a
Yeah,
small
yeah.
little place. Or like one guy went over to his house to meet his brand new puppy. And I was like, I will go out on a date with you if I can meet your puppy. And that was the only date we ever had. He'd asked me out several times. I just didn't think it was going to be a fit. And he had this 8-week-old puppy. And the girls had told me that my dating strategy should be only to date guys with dogs. Because they were like, Mom, if you meet a man and he has a dog, you get to pet the dog, then at least the date isn't a waste if it's pet.
I love that
I don't think I
philosophy.
wrote about that one. So this was in January. I was recalibrating after being unceremoniously dumped by the first person I'd had a relationship with after my marriage. And I was like kind of sad. So I went out on 3 dates with guys that had dogs. And this guy went over to his house and I was like, is it weird that I'm going to your house on our first date? But it was like a Sunday morning coffee and pastry kind of thing.
Sure.
And I was like, I don't think serial killers have puppies. And then somebody the other day was like, oh, didn't Ted Bundy have a dog? I thought, okay, I got to stop that joke.
Yeah.
I should not, violence. I should not even, this is all tongue in cheek and from my little corner of the world. But so it's sort of an expectation that someone's Googling you, that you're just going to like the person I'm meeting up with someone for the first time tomorrow. And I said to him, like, checked you out. It's good to know that you seem like you are who you say you are. He has an open Instagram, so I could kind of like see,
Yeah.
and he was like, yeah. And I looked you up and I read several articles about your dead parents. And the world that we're in. So for some people, it's a little much. For some people, it's very appealing. For some
Yeah.
people, they don't get it. One guy stopped responding to my text after he asked to read something I'd written, and I sent him an article, and he just never wrote back to me again.
On one hand, that's like awe, but on the other hand, it's like, I now, like recovered Robert, applaud when people select their way out of my orbit.
Yeah.
It's saving me the energy. It's like, if we're not right, if there's something about what I'm doing, being me, because I, in some ways, resemble your daughter. I don't go upside down in 2 minutes.
Nonconformist.
I have my own way. I play trumpet. She plays trombone. Whatever. But meanwhile, me being me, some people don't like it.
Yeah.
My older brother did not like it at all. My older brother was really upset about me being attention seeking. And granted, I was doing it to a high degree when I was younger, but still, and so meanwhile, if somebody doesn't like it, well, this is me, and I've got my whole story. I mean, I read about my divorce on my website, it's out there. And so, fine. If that doesn't work for you, like, you have a great life.
Each his own. Yeah.
But for the people that see that, there's a group of people that see that and they're like, oh yeah, I like that. Well, yeah, fine. Let's just make this easy. Let's be really open about it, which is very different from what dating used to be when I was younger, where it was all performance.
Yeah. And I think there are places where that's happening. I don't know how to rationalize I feel I've been dating for about a year, and I feel like, and the last time I was single was 20 years ago. And I was 22 and I was living in DC, and it was very, very different. And I had never used an app. So a story I like to tell is that I downloaded Bumble last fall, and I had some single friends who were like, when you're ready to use an app, call us. We're not going to let you do this alone. Not even being gentle. They were like, you're not capable. You need us to show you how to do this. And I was like, okay. And then, as I sometimes do, I just impulsively did it one night. And it turns out the swiping is not intuitive. And I had never used a swiping technology. And I was like looking at it, I was like, swipe. What do they say in pop culture? Swipe right. And then I was like, is swipe right good or is swipe right bad? And it doesn't tell you. There's no tutorial. If there is, I missed it. One person told me that they looked up YouTube videos on how to do it. I did not. I didn't even think about that. If it was today, I would have asked Claude, what direction do I swipe on Bumble?
Yeah.
And so I was swiping the wrong direction for like 48 hours, and I got some weird messages. And then I finally figured it out. I started swiping the other direction. And it was really funny. And I've talked with a few people, because a lot of people I tend to connect with people who are also parents, not exclusively, but I do think parents tend to connect with parents.
Yeah.
I connect with people who are, generally plus or minus about 5 years, more plus 5 years my age, or right about my age. And a lot of us are in a similar position where we were married for a long time and now we're single. Again, sure. Not everybody. Mm-hmm. So, but it's like a common joke. It's kind of a fun thing to talk about, because it is like embarrassing and humiliating and fun and funny to be like the old person using the young person's app. And I've been told by girls my daughter's age that apps are actually old school now. And I'm like, well, then what's contemporary? And they're like, offline dating. And I'm like, I live in Vermont. There's like 5 people here. That's not even an option for me. I can't offline date. That would be great if that works. Maybe that will happen. But so it's kind of funny to compare notes with people. And many people have told me they had the same problem. They were swiping the wrong direction.
I've heard about Bumble. Bumble's the app where the woman makes the first
historically
decision.
They've changed it, but yeah, historically the way it was designed was it was like there was a movie, one of those like tech origin stories.
Oh, okay.
I think she worked at Tinder or something, which was very male centric, and so she designed Bumble to be the antidote to that. And now the way that one works is that 2 people have to match before they can communicate.
Okay.
And then and it used to be that the woman had to make the first move, but it's not like that anymore.
Okay.
But on Hinge, which I only recently started using, is the other popular one, at least in my little.
Yeah, I have used Hinge, and for like about a month, and I'm like, yeah, I'm enough for a while.
I love that
I
we're
took a
comparing notes
break
on this.
after a while.
Well, you may not remember, and I feel like you'll find this funny. I haven't really talked about this, but on Hinge, the biggest difference is, so you like fill out this profile, right? And there's all these thought prompts. I love a thought prompt. I crush it. I
Oh yeah,
love these thought prompts. And people can send you a note, like respond to something you've written before you match.
yeah,
And it's actually kind of nice. You can't do that on Bumble. So on Bumble, you just have to find someone's profile interesting enough to give them a chance to message you. But on Hinge, you can kind of jump ahead a step. And so, like, one person, the person I'm meeting up with tomorrow, sent me a note that it was like a really clever opening line that was responding to something I'd written, which kind of conveys, hey, I find you interesting enough to have actually scrutinized your answer to this question. And I
yeah.
was really affirmed by that. But the problem I have is people, I have a friend from LinkedIn who will be thrilled to hear me reference this. But when I wrote my Hinge profile, I wrote, there's a prompt, never have I ever. And I wrote just pickles. I hate those things. They're disgusting. I hate pickles. I often will, if I'm writing a post on LinkedIn that's kind of boring, but I want it to get a little bit of exposure, I will add a comment about pickles in it. Or I will use pickle emojis like for bullets. And I'll say the reason I use pickles is because they're disgusting and this is bad behavior or something. And every time I do that, people get real. Pickles are like a topic. And so I put that on Hinge, and I got to be honest, Robert, my first week, I got flooded with messages from people about pickles. And if I were to do, I joke that I'm doing field research, but if I were to like publish my findings, I would say the vast majority of the men who've messaged me, and this is not a sexual thing.
Yeah.
There's no innuendo in this. This is just, people are very upset that I don't like pickles. And most of them are like younger, which is sort of interesting. But my problem is that people write stuff that makes me laugh. And I'm just out here in the world, walking through the world, just waiting for someone to say something interesting, teach me something new, change my perspective, or make me laugh. Like, I can't resist it.
Sure.
A clever message. And so I will match so I can respond. But then I'm matching with all these people, and Hinge keeps telling me I'm over capacity.
Yeah, they'll shut you down. They won't let you do anything until you like address the messages in your inbox.
And then you clean it out. I'm like, I've got to stop responding to people just because I'm engaging in fun banter about pickles that I'm not actually ever going to go on a date with.
Well, yeah, that's fair too. And thing I liked about Hinge is that it was actually like conversation.
Yeah,
and it was things that were interesting, and
it lends itself to that. Yeah,
if I go back, and I may or may not, because when it turns out, it's like there's so much artifice even in that app, and there's it just became draining because I like this level of conversation.
You and I are not casual conversationalists. So that is
no, I dive deep, and so when I'm thinking about dancing again, I was my hobby forever. And I was a teacher and a competitor, and I'm studying. I'm going to classes in Argentine tango because now I'm like stable enough to handle it. Because that's a dance where you're pretty much like in embrace with somebody while you're dancing, and if you're not like stable, it can be really difficult. Now I've done enough work that I can do that, and so I think that's a whole dance community I'm not part of. Because the Argentine tango community is very different from the swing community and the country community and the ballroom community.
I didn't know.
And I've been over all of those. I've done it all. Pretty much everything but polka. I have done, and I've taught, and I've competed in. So it's like that's a very portable hobby, and it's something to do.
Well, here's something I want to say. Sorry, I don't want to. If you were making a point, that's interesting. I love hearing you talk about dancing. I didn't know about that, and I hope you'll keep us posted on that. But I was thinking about this, and two things that I want people to know who maybe are in midlife and are thinking about dating, or are happily married and never would, but kind of wonder what it would be like, right?
Yeah.
Which was me, before. The artifice is there. I say this again in a state that's very much heavily about like you meet with people and it's like, oh, how many days did you ski last winter? I mean, that's what's your favorite sport, outdoor activity in September. So it's a very outdoorsy kind of place here. There's not a lot of artifice in Vermont, but it's a different kind of artifice. But I find it's not that hard to see through it. I find that it's quite clear when somebody is on there making a genuine effort.
Yeah.
I, as a words person, am genuinely touched by what it feels like to reemerge midlife, be single, it changes the way you interact with people of the opposite sex,
Yeah.
whether you want it to or not. You know, when you're married in a marriage and you're in a community like mine, you're like a safe person because you're like almost a non-existent person because you're like locked up in this couple for life. Suddenly when you're single, you're like this free agent, and not, it's not like I'm going around hitting on people in my community. There's not really any single people here, but you're a little scary for people because you stepped out of the status quo.
Oh, okay.
You dared to walk away from a good life and strike out on your own,
Yeah.
and you're also happy, and you and your ex get along. It's like very confusing because I think it kind of shakes certain perceptions of what we are not. It's like you're breaking a social code almost, that we're all, you know, when you go to, like, I was at a barbecue the other day and it was like the classic kids were all playing, mom's over here, dad's over here. And it's partly just, we were joking because the moms were having, I thought, a way more interesting conversation. The dads were having a super boring conversation. We were kind of teasing each other about it. But there is sort of the social code of like, this is what we do. And the dads stand here and the girls, you know, and then divorced couples kind of mess that up. And that's a little upsetting. So I find it interesting that suddenly you're out here and people are like open and vulnerable and sharing themselves with you and putting themselves on these apps and writing about like what they've learned. And not all of them, and a lot of them don't get it right, and a lot of them aren't what they seem, sure. But by and large, I have gone on many first dates this past year, and every single one of them, I have been profoundly like moved in some way by the way that these people open up and share who they are. And it's a really kind of lovely thing. So like, yeah, I joke about it. I had a business lunch yesterday and the woman was like, "Oh, I read that one post you wrote about like the hobbies of middle-aged men you've dated." And on the one hand, I'm kind of like, I'm doing this to myself, that I'm like at a business meeting and my dating life. I do that to myself. But on the other hand, like what I hope people get is that I am having some fun with the absurdities of this. And also I'm kind of opening it up for people because I'm someone who, I fall a little bit in love with almost everyone that I meet. I'm just out here looking to fall in love with people. I like love to learn about people and understand them. And every client that I have, every person that I work with, and even these guys that I go on dates with, they're opening themselves up. You know, we're spending an evening sitting by a river in the middle of the summer with a complete stranger talking about ourselves. That's kind of a beautiful thing to do in your life.
And yeah, I'm glad you got to that because I love the approach you're taking to dating. I'm enthralled by it. I wish more people did, because what occurs to me is like you're going out there connecting with humans. You're being curious, you're learning, you're accepting that this is a human that's been through whatever they've been through in life, and you're getting to know them. And I'm like, holy crap. It occurs to me as a rare thing, but it's only rare because it takes a person being vulnerable enough to put themselves in that position, and you're doing that. And I keep cheering for you as you're doing this, because I think the world needs more of that. It needs more of that in dating. It needs more of that everywhere.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Like these stories are hilarious and you can't write them. And even the mishaps in my life that aren't related to dating in the last year are like so entertaining to me, and I just feel so open to the universe, and it's a really great way to feel, and it's a bit of an antidote to that kind of middle-aged stuckness that a lot of us feel. And I joked, I was at a gathering of women last night. It was like drinks and cake in the middle of the summer, and it was really fun. um and I just, you know, I feel like there's this sense of openness, and I said, I'm not going to recommend divorce to everybody. But I've had a pretty good experience with it. And I think it's okay to say that because there's a whole lot of people not saying, but implying sort of the opposite. And I do think our culture has gotten to the point where there's not like, I mean, I don't know, maybe some people feel sort of shut out of certain social communities if they are divorced. In my experience, even professionally, I had a really impressive inbound client call last 2 weeks ago with a senior executive who's just retired from Silicon Valley job, like big job. And about 2 minutes in, she was terrifying. I was like nervous talking to her. And I mentioned something about being divorced. And she was like, "Oh, let me give you some dating advice." And she just goes off on this whole thing. And suddenly there's this new level of humanity that is really, if you are willing to lead with it, people will respond in kind. That
I
feels pretty good. You know?
I appreciate that, and I appreciate vulnerability. I appreciate intimacy. It's relatively newfound appreciation for me, but um, I end up connecting with people over the planet now. I've had guests on the podcast, and I've got friends from the LinkedIn uh, ethos. Um, I just adore it. I'm loving getting to meet people, and I've met like 3 or 4 people in the last few days. In fact,
Really?
there's communities that I'm getting connected with. I'm having a great time, and I think the world and its woes, which we've actually done a really good job of not diving into those,
We
would be
could.
eased a lot if there was more of this kind of humanity, more of this kind of connection. And I suppose in a way, as I realize I'm like looking at the clock, but I want to say that's one of the reasons why I'm such a devoted follower of your writing and your work and your posts, is because you're projecting these very human connection perspectives that I value and that I appreciate, and I feel seen just by reading what you write.
That's a remarkable thing to say. Thank you. And I feel like you're doing the exact same thing. I think we're in pretty good company here.
Uh, One of the reasons why I think we've gone quite a ways into this, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, even though I want to talk to you for another 2 hours, and maybe we'll do another one at some point in the future.
Sure.
But so, if people want to reach out to you, how would they reach you?
My website's a great place to go, captivatingco.com. I named it Captivating, by the way, because I launched my business 8 months after I left DC, where I lived for 20 years, and I moved to Vermont. And it was such a big, massive life upheaval. And I remember saying to people, life is short, like move to Vermont. And then I remember thinking, life is short, be captivating. Don't we tend to drown out our most interesting selves into like this corporate conformity? And that's kind of the main thing I'm fighting against everywhere in my work. And so it's all about helping companies, teams, people, anybody I'm working with kind of go back and really recognize and own that unique, captivating trait that everybody has somewhere in them. Like I just told you, I fall a little bit in love with everybody. Everyone's got incredible stories. So captivatingco.com, and you can find a contact form there and access to all my articles, my podcasts, and of course on LinkedIn. And my handle is Catlin O.
Awesome. Um, it has been so wonderful to have you here, and I keep forgetting to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and try. So I'm Robert Haynes, and I am a Jungian life coach with lots of different modalities under my belt. I love to help helpers, people that love to help other people. And in particular, I happen to have a skill set that's very well suited to helping people get unstuck and to follow their own advice. That helpers that help other people do things, we all need some support from somebody. This is what I do. And I love meeting people, getting to know them, and helping them really achieve what they want to in life, because from what I found, you can have whatever you want if you're willing to take the action to support it. Kat, I just have had so much fun. I got lost in the fact that we were doing a podcast because I was just enjoying the conversation. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. All right. I will see you on LinkedIn. Thanks for having me.